What if the biggest turning point in the war was not a massive offensive, but a slow collapse hidden beneath the headlines? After years of relentless fighting, Russia appears to be facing pressures that no amount of territory alone can easily overcome. Meanwhile, Ukraine has quietly transformed the battlefield with new tactics that reach far beyond the front lines. Drones, economic warfare, and shifting alliances are beginning to challenge assumptions that once seemed unshakable. Could this be the moment when the balance of the war finally starts to change? Or is another dramatic twist still waiting ahead? Before examining today's battlefield, we need to understand how this long and exhausting conflict reached its current turning point. The story began in 2014 when Russia seized Crimea and fighting erupted across eastern Ukraine, reshaping European security for years to come. The conflict expanded dramatically in early 2022 as Russia launched its full-scale invasion with expectations of a swift victory. During the opening weeks, Russian forces captured vast areas before determined Ukrainian resistance halted many of their advances. Successful Ukrainian counteroffensives later reclaimed significant territory and prevented Moscow from achieving its original military objectives. After those dramatic campaigns, the war gradually evolved into a grinding struggle where every village, trench, and crossroads demanded enormous sacrifices. Instead of rapid breakthroughs, both armies became locked inside an unforgiving war of attrition, stretching across hundreds of miles. Russia continued making limited territorial gains, but every advance demanded increasingly heavy costs in manpower and equipment. The battlefield slowly transformed into an environment where progress was measured in meters rather than kilometers. Behind the front lines, both nations devoted enormous economic resources to sustaining military production and replacing battlefield losses. Russia relied on its larger population, industrial capacity, and financial incentives to maintain a continuous flow of new recruits. Ukraine, facing greater demographic pressure, searched for ways to offset Russia's numerical advantages through innovation instead of sheer numbers. Military planners on both sides realized that traditional tactics were becoming less effective against increasingly sophisticated surveillance and precision strikes. Every month that the conflict continued placed additional strain on soldiers, commanders, industries, and civilians alike. Political leaders also faced mounting pressure as expectations of a quick victory faded further into the distance. For the Kremlin, capturing the entire Donbas remained a central objective, despite the growing difficulty of achieving it. Yet the pace of Russian advances steadily slowed, while the cost of maintaining offensive operations continued rising. These developments encouraged analysts to question whether the existing balance of the war was beginning to shift. Rather than one decisive battle, the conflict appeared to be entering a new phase shaped by endurance, technology, and economic resilience. Understanding this transformation is essential before examining why Ukraine's evolving strategy may now be changing the course of the war. Ukraine's response to this exhausting stalemate was not another massive counteroffensive, but a fundamental transformation in how it chose to fight. Instead of matching Russia tank for tank and artillery shell for artillery shell, Kyiv increasingly embraced technology, precision, and asymmetric warfare. The most visible symbol of that transformation became the explosive growth of first-person view drones, produced by hundreds of domestic manufacturers. These inexpensive aircraft rapidly evolved from experimental weapons into indispensable battlefield tools, capable of striking soldiers, vehicles, and fortified positions with remarkable accuracy. As production expanded into the millions, drones began saturating the front line and dramatically altered the tactical environment for both armies. Vast stretches of contested territory became permanent surveillance zones where almost every movement could be detected within minutes. Advancing armored columns that once defined 20th century warfare suddenly became highly vulnerable to swarms of inexpensive aerial attackers. Medical evacuations also grew significantly more dangerous because drones frequently targeted vehicles attempting to rescue wounded personnel. The result was a battlefield where casualties mounted even faster as survival after injury became increasingly uncertain. Ukraine did not stop at short-range systems, but also invested heavily in intermediate-range drones capable of striking logistical targets far behind the front. These aircraft repeatedly attacked ammunition depots, fuel convoys, radar installations, command centers, and transportation corridors supporting Russian operations. Every successful strike forced Russian commanders to devote additional manpower and resources to protecting supply routes instead of sustaining offensive momentum. At the strategic level, Ukraine expanded its campaign with long-range drones capable of reaching deep inside Russian territory. Energy facilities, oil refineries, export terminals, and critical infrastructure increasingly became targets designed to reduce the economic resources funding the war. Rather than focusing solely on reclaiming territory, Kyiv sought to raise the long-term financial cost of continuing the conflict for Moscow. This strategy also compelled Russia to invest heavily in air defenses, electronic warfare systems, and protective infrastructure across an enormous geographic area. Every additional defensive requirement consumed money, equipment, and personnel that could no longer be concentrated at the front. Meanwhile, continued military assistance and industrial cooperation from Western partners strengthened Ukraine's ability to sustain this technology-driven approach. The conflict gradually evolved into a contest where innovation, industrial capacity, and economic endurance became just as important as battlefield courage. These developments help explain why many analysts believe the current phase of the war looks fundamentally different from the brutal attritional campaigns that dominated previous years. If these trends continue, the Kremlin may soon face some of the most difficult strategic decisions since the full-scale invasion began. Russia still possesses considerable military resources, substantial industrial capacity, and a larger population than Ukraine, making any prediction of a rapid collapse unrealistic. However, sustaining a prolonged war becomes increasingly difficult as casualties, financial pressures, and public fatigue gradually accumulate. One possible path would be to continue the current strategy of attritional warfare while hoping Ukraine eventually exhausts its manpower and international support. The strength of this approach lies in Russia's larger resource base and its willingness to absorb higher battlefield losses over extended periods. Its greatest weakness, however, is that time also imposes mounting economic and political costs on Russia itself. A second option would involve launching another large-scale mobilization to reinforce exhausted frontline formations and accelerate offensive operations. Such a decision could temporarily increase available manpower and potentially restore operational momentum in key sectors of the battlefield. Yet another nationwide mobilization would almost certainly carry significant domestic political risks and place additional pressure on the Russian economy. A third possibility would be seeking negotiations or a ceasefire while retaining control of currently occupied territory. This option could reduce military expenditures and stabilize the domestic situation if both sides accepted a temporary pause in fighting. On the other hand, neither Moscow nor Kyiv has publicly demonstrated a willingness to compromise on several of their core strategic objectives. Ukraine continues insisting on protecting its sovereignty, while Russia maintains that key territorial goals remain essential to its security. Those fundamentally different positions make a comprehensive political settlement extremely difficult to achieve in the near future. At the same time, continued technological innovation is reshaping military doctrine faster than many traditional armies anticipated. The growing importance of drones, electronic warfare, artificial intelligence, and precision strikes may influence conflicts far beyond Eastern Europe. Future military planners around the world are already studying this war as a laboratory for the next generation of combat operations. Whether Ukraine ultimately regains more territory or Russia consolidates its current positions, both sides have permanently changed modern warfare. The coming months may therefore determine not only the future of this conflict, but also the direction of military strategy for decades ahead. And that leaves one final question lingering above every battlefield, every negotiation, and every capital involved. Who can truly endure longer in a war where time itself has become the most decisive weapon? The battlefield may be changing, but the ultimate outcome of this war remains far from certain, despite the momentum now appearing to shift. Ukraine's evolving strategy has demonstrated that technology, resilience, and sustained international support can reshape even the most difficult military balance. Russia still possesses significant resources, ensuring that any path toward peace or victory will likely remain long, costly, and deeply uncertain. Perhaps the greatest lesson of this conflict is that modern wars are no longer decided only by territory, but also by innovation, endurance, and economic strength. As history continues to unfold, the question is no longer simply who can win the next battle, but who can endure long enough to shape the peace that follows. So if you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next deep dive.